Hello everyone, and today we're going to be talking about religion in Warhammer and why it isn't represented well for the Empire. You see, religion has a massive part to play when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy because the gods are the strength of not only the priests but also the magical barriers that stop the Aether from, well, pouring in. The pantheons tend to be quite active and religion is more or less represented in certain parts. Of course, the Warriors of Chaos have the Gifts of Chaos. Bretonia has the Blessing of the Lady. But the Empire, the human faction with one of the largest pantheons available, and which is something so deeply engraved into their lore, has never really had that much of representation. Volkmar exists, and hopefully if we end up getting Boris Todbringer at some point, I'm hoping Creative Assembly haven't forgotten about him, we might see some Ulrich themes, but there are other gods. The Imperial Pantheon is actually quite large, with the old gods being the main ones there before the rise of Sigmar, Sigmar obviously ascending to godhood, and of course the classical gods like Verena or Mor, my favourite god of the Empire. None of them are really represented too well, and it's a massive shame. We do have some slight representation, obviously thanks to Null being introduced, a little bit of more worship has come in, even if it is just very minor and in the form of a unit. But that doesn't show the scope and the scale of religion within the Empire, the festivals, the holy nights, and just in general, the gods which keep the Empire from totally fracturing, but also showing the diverse religions within the Empire. The weird thing about Warhammer 3 is that all the regions kind of look the same, and this is something that's always bothered me. Now, we can't obviously get state troopers that look exactly like each of the provincial stylings, but maybe showcase a little bit of religion here and there. Within the lands of the Empire, depending on what province you're at, is going to be very different religiously. If you go to Middenland, it's going to be a lot of temples to Ulrich. Talabecland, a lot of temples to Tal. And obviously Reichland, temples to Sigmar, with smaller temples spread out throughout the Empire to each of the gods, as Mor, Mimidia, and the rest would be considered minor deities, but still very important in the day-to-day lives of the Imperials. Now, what could be done here? I'm not suggesting bringing in like warrior priests of each of the different gods because it wouldn't really be viable. If anything, yeah, Sigmarite, Talites, and maybe Ulrichian, but even then, it's something that would be a bit of a stretch. Instead, there are things that could be done just to keep that theming going. New buildings could be introduced throughout the Empire, but themed for the Empire. So within the lands of the Empire, if you build up in, say, for example, Reichland, you could have a major temple to Sigmar and then some minor temples to different gods, having the choice of different types of temple styles. Going into Talabecland would remove the temple to Sigmar but have a temple to Tal. The idea here is focusing on the main patron god, which those three are generally the most biggest ones, especially as church and state kind of intertwine a bit. This could be done, again, I've said this before, in the same way as a Total War Saga Troy. You can build up and get some minor bonuses for the province and the region, so anything that kind of fits there, you know, if you're building close to Sylvania, you might want to build up the Temple of Mor to reduce undead corruption, Mimidia in your coastal areas, so that way it gives you some extra disembarking moving range, so your ships can move a little bit faster. It all depends on the type of god, right? And this could trigger into other stuff. Troy's effects were really good here, and it's a shame that it doesn't get reused. Especially since CA Sophia is working on Warhammer lately. It provides a little bit of extra oomph towards your regions. But this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Building up these buildings could give you favor, which would then translate to the same system as Troy, where you could get some powerful faction-wide bonuses, either a weaker one, which is just faction-wide and permanent, or a really powerful one, and that one would last for a certain amount of turns, depending on the level that you've gotten to. Mods have actually done this before. I don't know if those mods are still being updated because obviously, you know, the workshop for Warhammer 3 is quite large. But the idea here is to represent the gods everywhere and have it centralized only within the lands of the Empire, meaning that if you expand outward, you wouldn't be able to build up those temples. I know that doesn't sound great for a lot of people, but the idea is just to keep it in the lore-centric spot. And you'd still be getting a lot of benefits which would help you in the long run. So you'd need buildings, which would be built up in specific areas, a large building in your major settlement if you want it, and some minor ones in your minor settlements, only going up to like, tier 3, which would then translate to getting a certain resource per turn and being able to then turn that into favor. The idea here is it's something that you can totally ignore if you want to, because the Empire is in a pretty good spot, barring the fact that it is one of the biggest mosh pits right now in the Warhammer Fantasy world, but you can get even stronger to allow you to prepare for future invasions if you're trying to get out there and attack other nations, or if you're defending yourself because Arbal, Archeon, and the rest have all decided to gang up on you. Player bias is an issue. But that's not all. This could be further expanded upon to provide some religion to other factions that really do need it. The elves are a good example here. There are 3 different types of elves: high elves, dark elves, and wood elves, but their pantheon mostly remains the same, barring which sect kind of worships a certain god as a chief deity or not. For example, the wood elves worshipping Kurnos higher than Cain. The only real divergence there would be the dark elves, where some parts of the dark elf cultures do worship Sinesh, which isn't a elven god, but it's the whole cult of Sinesh thing, which is slowly creeping back, thanks to Cubicle 7 as of late, and obviously Creative Assembly putting a little bit of more of a Sinesh feel towards Morathi and her playable faction. So again, a series of buildings, just at the very end of your building tab, focusing on all the different types of gods to allow for that feeling of, yes, you can get these buildings if you want them, if you want the bonuses, but you can totally ignore them too. Same thing which pretty much happened with Troy. I mean, I played a full campaign with Troy without basically using anything of the gods, and it was more than viable. Optional mechanics are always the best way to go, and it's something that we have lost. Religion was always a bit of a key factor with older Total War games, and yeah, it's just missing. It's weird. When we're heading to Total War 40k, you think it's gonna pop up again, right? It's little details, like for example with the greenskins. The greenskins have more than just 2 gods. Gork and Mork are the main ones, of course, but depending on, like say for example, the forest goblins, you have the spider god. And in some cases in Warhammer Fantasy, obviously more improved in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, the night goblins had a deity known as the Bad Moon. This stuff is little bits of flavor which really adds to a lot of context regarding all the gods, so a few buildings could come in there. There are no real buildings barring the Shaman tent. Whereas of Chaos, those Undivided and also God-touched, while they do have like the Chaos gifts and stuff, it's pretty much like a flat thing. There are no specific buildings if you're going to be, say for example, playing Azazel or playing Festus. Your buildings there are still the Undivided ones. So having something with a divided touch, with a God-based idea, alongside maybe something that everyone's been asking for, let's be honest, the cultists being available to the Warriors of Chaos, as they would be spreading out the religious ideals more than anyone else, well, that would actually bring in a lot more flavor to these characters. The problem, I guess, is that the cultists aren't really cultists, they're more demon summoners than anything else, and they don't really have too many uses. This is an issue with the cultist hero rather than the interpretation, in a sense. The only faction that really does have like a true religion-based mechanic would be, well, Kislev. Kislev's got a lot of blessings and stuff, even if they're missing out on warrior priests, or patriarchs better yet said, that's the actual naming of them, of the specific gods like Dars and stuff, right? Even then, we're still missing out on actual buildings to Dars and all the other gods. I feel like this is something that would just tie Warhammer 3 a little bit more closer together, because there are so many factions that have these specific types of religious standings. Religion in Warhammer has always been very big. It's especially so in like 40k, and you can see it in fantasy too. So I'd like to be able to play a Lizardman campaign and build up separate different temples to specific gods. Hell, with Bretonia being monotheistic, but actually the peasantry does support other deities that aren't the lady, maybe having some exclusive rights to the peasants for that. We spoke about this ages ago, but I've been thinking about it again because I've been working on some like religion-based armies for the tabletop. I've been thinking about Total War Warhammer in that sense too. Obviously it's not as important as, AI fixes and siege fixes, but yeah, it's just one of those things, right? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I do apologize. I've actually started to get a little bit ill as I'm finishing off this video. So I'm going to get some rest. See you guys. Bye.